Alrighty, now it's time to start off with the live-action TV shows, which has a pretty good filmography in my opinion. Overall, they're pretty solid. There's definitely one weaker one and one much stronger one. So let's start off with the show which many would argue kind of resurrected Star Wars in a lot of ways, being The Mandalorian. Season 3 is still upcoming as of the recording of this video. March 1st, I believe, so that's going to be really exciting. So for me, I love the show. I really do like it. I love the new characters. Din Djarin and Grogu are phenomenal. I love them a lot. The show's a little tricky because, well, TV shows in general are tricky because they're not as streamlined in tone as a movie would be, because I mean, shows are episodic, you know, you have different story arcs, you have side quests, you have main ongoing story arcs that are a little bit more important. So for The Mandalorian, I guess the best way I could discuss this show is by discussing the two seasons. I think one season was a lot better than the other. I think season 1 was far superior. I loved the pacing, the evolution of Din Djarin's story. I love how he's a Mandalorian with the armor and all that, but at the same time, he's kind of just a guy doing his job. He's just a bounty hunter. He's just dragging people in and stuff like that. He's just going about his mundane life. He pretty much starts off like a lot of our main characters do. They're just doing their thing, and then they get pulled into a situation. But for Din Djarin's case, he did not need to get pulled into anything. He chose to basically corrupt his own routine because he felt that he needed to be doing something differently in the interest of ethics, at the very least. And of course, this came in the form of the child, when, of course, he and IG-11 were hunting down this 50-year-old target, and it turned out to be a baby. He realized, wait a minute, I'm not going to see this kid die, so he kills IG-11, and he still is figuring it out, but not in time before he actually brings the baby to the client. And then before he goes off world, he's in the Razor Crest and he's like, this is a mistake. I'm a bounty hunter, but this is not the type of bounty I should be doing. He goes back in and he pulls Grogu out of there and he saves him. So I just love the fact that this plot is so non-linear. I say that for a reason, we'll get to that. And yeah, I just love that basically this show is all about a character testing their faith. Kind of similarly to the Jedi in a lot of ways with Luke and Anakin. It's about the Mandalorian being raised with the Mandalorian way, as is very blatantly discussed throughout the show. And he sees that the way of the Mandalorian might not be his way. He needs to make sacrifices for this kid that he loves, who is not a Mandalorian. And he's part of the Bounty Hunters Guild, and he has to defy his bounties, his targets, so he can be sure that a kid is safe. He doesn't care where the kid came from. He doesn't even care that the kid is a unique species. He just knows this is a child, and simply they should not be subject to the brutalities of the bounty hunter life. So he tries to take care of him to the best of his ability. And even then, he still brings him in on very dangerous missions and all of that. And all this sort of comes to a head with Moff Gideon, who was a really good villain reveal, and I love Gideon. I think his the actor who portrayed him did a very good job. I liked him a lot. And yeah, that whole show, just all the arcs, all the characters, I thought were very interesting. Like, Cara Dune was pretty cool. Like, she was a heavyweight within the rebellion. I like that she had a backstory, and unfortunately, that actress will not be returning. But even then, I think her story ended well. Like, she kind of got a rebellion badge. Like that pilot kind of said, even though you're kind of doing your own thing now, you're welcome back anytime. And then she kind of has that medallion. She kind of tosses it in her hands, and she's like, okay, yeah, I can keep doing my part. So for me, I think her character, who's likely never going to return, she left off at a good spot. Queel was also really cool. I liked how he was basically Din Djarin's Yoda, in a sense. He's a guy who's kind of seen it all. He's seen history transpire, and he's still kind of jaded, kind of crotchety, and you get kind of, we discussed Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces. There's the classic mentor leader character rather, who dies at some point midway through the hero's journey, and that's Queel for Din Djarin. He dies very unexpectedly and shockingly, and that takes him aback, and he's forced to kind of like, that's the first time we see a pivotal death within the Mandalorian, and I guess that sort of makes him want to perhaps ensure the safety of the child more. So yeah, first season, very spectacular. I don't think there was ever a dull moment. I guess the one episode I didn't really like is when he kind of hooked up with that kid to get rid of Fennec Shand. I felt like that episode was pretty unconsequential. It was just filler, so I didn't like that a lot. But first season, very, very good. Loved it a lot. As for the second season, this is a matter of, wow, it's quantity over quality. The first season took its time to build things out, and had some really good moments. The second season had some really, really excellent moments that were so good. You know what I'm talking about. Boba Fett and Luke, of course. But at the same time, it was a little bit too fan-servicey. I think it overdid that a little bit. And it also felt too much like a video game in a way. I felt like every episode was like, "Congratulations, Mandalorian, you have accomplished this task. Now talk to this Mandalorian on this other planet." Then he meets Bo-Katan. She's like, "Hey, good work. Now you can go talk to Ahsoka Tano, and she's on this planet." And then he goes to Ahsoka Tano, who also says, "Hey, good work on this planet. Now how about you go to this other planet so you can try finding another Jedi? I don't know who the Jedi is going to be, but maybe he'll be of use to you." So it just felt, again, I talked about linear storytelling in season 1. This season was too linear. I didn't like how it was too straightforward. But that being said, where it succeeded very well. I loved the Boba Fett scene. That drove me nuts. As a person who affiliates with like Scum and Villainy and the Bounty Hunters more than anything, I loved seeing Boba Fett just kick Imperial ass. That was so cool. Then when Luke came in and the score swelled, I mean, even before that, when you saw that lone X-Wing fly in, like, that's when eyes widened. We knew things were about to happen. And I just ignore the shoddy CGI Luke face that we got. It's not a big deal. They patched that up in Book of Boba Fett, so I ignore the bad CGI face. But then his whole scene was spectacular. But then the best moment in The Mandalorian was in Season 2, where Mando is about to say goodbye to Grogu, and then Grogu puts a little tiny green hand on Mando's mask. He doesn't need to say a word. You know exactly what Grogu's thinking. Like, "Dad, I've never seen your face before. Like, before I go, can you give me this?" And this is the moment where the Mandalorian is a Mandalorian no more. He takes off his helmet before a living being for the first time ever. And that, by default, basically gets him shunned from his faith. But it's just for those few precious seconds of giving his kid a chance to touch his father. And that is the only moment in Star Wars history that ever made me cry. That was such a perfectly done moment. So the build-up was so good. That moment was very well earned. It was so gorgeous, and it kind of echoed back to Luke's relationship with Vader. Like, that was, I mean, by this point, that's kind of a common knowledge thing for me. I never really cried to that moment, but I always knew its significance. So for me, this was like another chance to see like a father and son relationship kind of come full circle in a very beautiful and poignant way. I really loved that. So ranking this show, it's tough because it's still ongoing. We don't know what the end game for this show is. But what has it done so far? It's done a lot of different things. It's done some very good stories. It's also done some side arcs that kind of weren't necessary, like the Frog Lady thing. I mean, that I don't hate those episodes, but they were kind of empty. I didn't feel like they added a whole ton, and they didn't progress a whole lot. So Again, Mandalorian's doing its own thing. It's not trying to progress a pre-existing story. I think what it's trying to do is potentially patch up holes within the sequel trilogy along the way. I mean, that's a prevailing theory right now. But I guess considering it as its own story, being Amanda being a very religious man, trying to balance his faith with his personal life. I mean, in the most layman's terms, that's what this show is all about. How good does it do at succeeding at that? At this present moment in time, very, very good. Again, if you ignore the filler, if you ignore kind of the stupid stuff, I think the overindulgence with nostalgia and all that, it's solid. It does very good. So I'd say I'd put it. I'm gonna give it B tier. While I put it in front of Revenge of the Sith, I I I don't think I will, simply because we don't know where the show is going yet. It's not done yet, so by default, I have to put it below Revenge of the Sith. We know what Revenge of the Sith was trying to do. For Mandalorian, it's still kind of up in the air. We don't totally know yet, so we gotta wait a little bit, and then we'll see what happens. But I like the direction it's going in. I think if I were to do a list like this in the future, it could definitely, absolutely go up. Okay, so what do we have next? Oh, we have the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. I just call it Kenobi show for short. I'm sure many people do. Very short show, but very cool. I liked it a lot. Again, it's not the most necessary story, but it did do something very valuable that I did not expect that it would do. And that was show us the first moments between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Princess Leia. I never considered the fact that we've never actually seen what their first interaction was. So this show was a really big surprise to me. It was a very good watch overall. I think it was only, 6 episodes? I don't know if they have plans on doing more. I hope they do, because I did enjoy it overall. But basically, for the plot, of course, we have Obi-Wan Kenobi after the events of the Revenge of the Sith, and naturally, the original trilogy hasn't happened. Ewan McGregor hasn't become Alec Guinness yet. So he's essentially a hermit for the first time. And he's sort of living in the Dune Sea, doing odd jobs, cutting up meat. And he is totally jaded and fractured. He has no hope for the Jedi anymore. Even a Jedi approaches him, and then Kenobi's like, go home, there's nothing left, just be safe, stay hidden, I believe. And yeah, it's a big change for a character who is otherwise very optimistic and considered by many to be one of the best Jedi of all time. And yeah, you could argue that he was very good at adhering to the principles, sticking with the dogma, playing it by the rules, and to see that all obliterate before his eyes, not to mention his best friend in the world, turn into one of the most evil men ever. Yeah, that's going to make a man a little bit pissy and a little bit isolated, so that's very understandable. And then, of course, he runs into Princess Leia, who is kind of taken around the galaxy by Reva, who is another character, and I love his interactions with Leia. I'll admit, when I first saw Kid Leia, I was excited, but also very worried, because every time we've had a kid actor in Star Wars, it was usually met with controversy. Maybe they didn't do so well. I'll admit, first episode I saw her in, I wasn't too sure yet, but as time went on, I'm like, you know what? This is kind of a kid Carrie Fisher. You could see it. She had that snarkiness. She was brash. She was loud when she needed to be loud. She was also sympathetic when the time called for it. I know nothing about the kid that played her, but she did a very good job. I believe she was the young Leia. I liked her a lot. Yeah, and then, of course, you had Reva, who, she's part of the Inquisitorius, who's a legion within the Empire that I've got wishy-washy feelings on, because the Inquisitorius, they first appeared in Star Wars Rebels, and so basically they're effectively fallen Jedi who are led by Darth Vader to exterminate non-converted Jedi who have somehow escaped Order 66, and I don't like the Inquisitors much. I'm split. There are some Inquisitors I like a lot. There are some that I really just dislike and feel like they don't contribute anything. Fortunately, Kenobi has one of the better Inquisitors, which is Reva. Her story's pretty cool. I like the twist of how she is solely part of the Inquisitorius just so she can get revenge against Darth Vader. I think that is such a petty reason to have, but it's a perfect launching point for a character arc. Like, her arc has not occurred yet, but I love how she's starting from such a low and pathetic place And if we ever see her character again, there's a lot of potential to see her become a lot more than herself. So I'm very much looking forward to that, if we could see that in the future. And again, very well acted. I really like how the character was handled. As for the rest of the Inquisitors, though, oh my god, total nerfs. They had nothing to do. The Grand Inquisitor was a real letdown for me, especially. I mean, if you saw my Star Wars Black Series Grand Inquisitor action figure review, you might know my thoughts on him, but yeah, I was hoping he'd be very cool, but again, well acted, didn't have a whole lot to do in the story. He kind of died and came back for no reason at all other than to prove that the dark side is very strong and leads to a pathway of many abilities. We all know how that ends, but so really it was mostly about Obi-Wan Kenobi and Leia. I also loved how they brought Bail Organa back. That was very cool. And also Owen and Beru, which was really neat. I really loved the idea of how Owen and Beru were so prepared to protect Kid Luke. Like, they had the rifles and everything. They were ready for an Imperial bombardment. And that kind of added to New Hope and gives you a new perspective on when they were destroyed by the Imperials, did they really go down without a fight? Maybe they actually held their own for a little while before they went down, which is another interesting thing to consider. So Kenobi tells a good, unique story while also adding to the stories that came before it in a pretty good way. I wouldn't say it was too fluffy. Again, it was a pretty short show, so there wasn't a whole lot of room for fluff. Things were, for the most part, pretty urgent, not too fast-paced at the same time. I thought it moved not too quickly. Yeah, it was good. I wouldn't say it was the best show that I've ever seen, but overall I did enjoy it. There are a lot of people who disliked it. I can't really say why necessarily. Like, some just thought it was alright. I kind of stay away from the Star Wars fandom zeitgeist, especially after the sequel trilogy. I kind of just focused on my own opinions. Oh, another thing to mention, of course, is Hayden Christensen's redemption. If you ever doubted that he was a bad actor, or that he was a good actor, rather, then watch Kenobi and see what he does here. He totally proves that it was the script that did him wrong in the prequels, not his acting ability. I mean, yeah, maybe he wasn't very well seasoned at the time, but every moment he had in Kenobi was so well done. Like, whether it be in the flashback sequences when he's training with Kenobi and he's getting a little bit ahead of himself, getting a little arrogant, he winds up getting defeated, and then that fight kind of informs how Kenobi thwarts Vader later on. And then, of course, yeah, that moment on that, I think it's an unnamed moon, where Kenobi bests Vader again. And then you hear that soul-shattering line of how Vader says, yeah, Anakin didn't die, I killed him, kind of, something along those lines. And then that's what allows Kenobi to accept that Anakin is no more. And that's what allows him to be so confident and kind of chilled out when he finally confronts him on the Death Star, New Hope, of course. Like, when his last words to Vader and Kenobi is Darth. That's the last name he calls him by. And then that's also the last name he calls him by in New Hope. So that kind of lends to more of that poetic aspect that we see strung throughout Star Wars. So I thought that was really cool. So, yeah, good show overall. I'm trying to keep this audio to, like, roughly 10 minutes per video, per movie, rather. I don't know how well I'm doing at that. Yeah, we're doing good, 8 minutes for this guy. So, Kenobi's purpose. It was kind of to explain, like, where Kenobi was coming from before he entered New Hope, before he met Luke, and it also gave us something that, again, I didn't know we needed, which was his initial interactions with baby Leia, which I thought was very well done. And if we just focus on those two, I thought it did a pretty good job. I mean, I don't think the show is the most needed thing ever, but it was good. It was pretty successful. Perhaps it could have gone a little bit bigger, but then, like, I thought the story was very small scale, but for what it was compelling. I thought it was well written. I wouldn't say that the supporting cast was the most stellar. Even the best characters, they didn't last very long, I felt like, or have much impact on either of the two characters. So it was really all about Kenobi and Leia, and then Riva on certain instances, and Anakin. Like, really, it was really just about those four characters. The rest, kind of pick them and choose them. They're not all that detrimental or significant, I don't think. So we're gonna go ahead and take Kenobi, and I think we'll put Kenobi next to Mandalorian, right? We're gonna put him in B tier. I won't put Kenobi above Revenge of the Sith because, again, it's tough. Revenge of the Sith, we know what its mission is. Kenobi could still continue, but at the same time, it can be open and shut. It can end right here and be fine. So if the purpose was to kind of just simply tell a story, that's cool, but I think I'll put it below Mandalorian because it wasn't telling something fresh. Like, it was kind of just discussing things that had already happened. It was a flashback, whereas Mandalorian is kind of its own isolated, brand new tale. So I give it a little bit more points for that. But yeah, Kenobi is a solid show. I don't really have any huge issues with it. I mean, I got a few grievances, but nothing too shattering of my image of it. Okay, so now that brings us to the Book of Boba Fett, which is, in my opinion, of the 4 live-action shows thus far, is definitely the weakest. And I like the stories that were in there, but the direction was very jarring. I didn't like how they started with Boba Fett having all the flashbacks and stuff, and so we could learn about his childhood, his life outside of the Sarlacc, how he got out and all that. That was good, but then they suddenly shifted to Mandalorian episodes, which is really, really weird. Both of them were actually excellent and better than all the other Boba Fett episodes combined. So that's the thing. This show, it causes a problem with the Mandalorian show, because when we get to... This is something that Star Wars Theory highlighted, which is very true. When we get to Season 3 of The Mandalorian, for people who haven't seen Book of Boba Fett, they're going to have no idea how the child, Grogu, returned to The Mandalorian. So it's just so weird how those two episodes are kind of just jammed into the Boba Fett show. Again, both very, very good episodes. I like them a lot. They just shouldn't have been in this show at all. It was so weird. I guess we'll talk about those two very briefly, and then we'll move it along. But basically, you had the Mandalorian suddenly show up. After he leaves Grogu with Luke, he's kind of just doing his old odd job. He's a bounty hunter again, literally collecting heads, kicking ass, taking names as per usual. He has the old Darksaber, which is very, very awesome. And basically, he wants to see the kid again and see how he's doing, check in on him. He forges some Beskar chainmail for him, and he brings it to the planet where he's being trained, and he's greeted by Ahsoka, of all people, which is very, very cool. One thing I really loved about these episodes is how it kind of united the two first trilogies. Of course, he had Ahsoka, who was in the movie trilogy, but she was in the Clone Wars, she's from the prequel era, really. And she's with Luke, which was such a cool thing, and it made perfect sense. He had two very strong Force wielders who both had a very deep connection to Anakin Skywalker, so I like that a lot. But all that being said, Din Djarin delivers the chainmail to Ahsoka, and she's like, Grogu's very busy and he can't have attachments right now, but I'll hold on to this for now. And then Mando leaves, and then Grogu, I loved the moments of him jumping on the rocks, and just the score. It had some of my favorite musical moments in all of Star Wars. I loved that moment with Grogu's training, and then seeing baby Grogu on the back of Luke's, on Luke's back, and that was such a very sweet callback to Empire Strikes Back, where instead of the Mentor being on the back, the Mentor is at the front, and then Luke is now taking up the role of Yoda. And there was something so sublime and beautiful about that. And then you get to that moment where Luke actually does hand the chainmail to Grogu, and he says, here is the chainmail, but here is also Yoda's lightsaber. Now you can choose whether to follow the path of a Mandalorian or a Jedi. and then you see Grogu's eyes widened. He gets it. He's a baby, but he understands. And those two episodes are some of the best episodes throughout all of the shows, but it's just so weird how they're kind of ham-fisted into Boba Fett, which is otherwise, fine. It's fun. It's enjoyable. I feel like it hops around a lot in certain spots, but I do like kind of that new origin story for Boba Fett, where he gets out of the Sarlacc, he earns the respect of the Tusken Raiders, they all get decimated, and since they're basically the second family that he never has, he gets his revenge against, was it the Nikto Pirates or the Pikes? I don't recall exactly, but yeah, and then he's trying to build up his criminal empire after that alongside Fennec Shand, who really doesn't have a whole lot to do in the show, and yeah, and then he finds like those kind of those greasers in on Tatooine, who I actually like. I think they were kind of cool, just kind of the street rats. I thought they were pretty cool. I like their Vespas too. Again, a lot of people give those Vespas a lot of flack. That's just what I'm gonna call them. But for me, again, it's kind of like George Lucas going back to old movies to kind of inform his Star Wars universe. Like, he did American Graffiti, which was I haven't seen the movie, I'll admit that, but you know, I was kind of deep-seated within 1950s nostalgia, and those Vespas were emblazoned with those 1950s colors and lights. I thought they were really cool. I enjoyed that. It was very different, so I thought those were neat. And then you had Boba Fett's quarrel with the Pikes, and then you get his encounter with Cad Bane. And if you hadn't watched the shows, I'm curious, if you hadn't seen the shows and then suddenly you saw Cad Bane, let me know what your first impressions were of him, because I'm very curious. But Cad Bane has existed since Clone Wars, and I knew of Cad Bane before I saw Book of Boba Fett, and when he showed up, I loved that No Country for Old Men interpretation of Cad Bane. I thought that was so cool, and that was the character that he was being grown to become eventually. I just thought that was the coolest thing. But then again, I loved the way he died. I feel like he died too soon. Like, they introduced a big bad, kind of like with Moff Gideon, you know? But then Moff Gideon lived, and then he continued into the second season of Mandalorian. But for Cad Bane, he shows up for an episode, next episode, dead. And that's really stupid. I really, really hate when characters come back from the dead. I feel like it's such a trope, and it really takes away from the characters who are still living. That's one reason why I really do not like watching the MCU. Like, you bring everyone back, how can you care about anybody? That's a story for another day. But yeah, for Cad Bane, this is one of those very rare instances where I do want to see a character come back, simply because I want more of him. I feel like there is more he can contribute to Boba Fett's growth as kind of understanding what family is. Again, his only parent figure growing up was Jango Fett, which is a very big deal to him. I actually wish they would have tapped into Jango Fett a little bit more. Maybe if they had a scene of young Boba Fett with Jango, maybe he's training with him a little bit. So I feel like there were some missed opportunities in there. Like, it's good that they moved towards the future, but if they would have dipped into the past a little bit more, that would have been appreciated as well. So, okay, so that's about how many seconds is that? Oh, 7 minutes. All right, so that's not so bad. But that's pretty much all I have to say about the show. 2 really good Mandalorian episodes. The Boba Fett stuff was, at the very least, enjoyable, and its good moments were cool. Very, very cool. For me, the big thing was Cad Bane. I think that was the highlight, and unfortunately that was cut very short when he quote-unquote died. He could still come back. He's a Duro. See, I don't know, maybe they have a healing factor. And at the same time, it's Cad Bane. He literally has a lot of tricks up his sleeve, so maybe he'll come back for another round. Time will tell. I have the feeling the show might not come back, so let's assume that this is, well, a closed book, if you will. The purpose of the show. What was the purpose of the show? I guess to continue the Mandalorian story at a time when it shouldn't have been continued. This should have been all about Tamora Morrison, who acted very well. I love Tamora Morrison a lot. He was always good. But in terms of Boba Fett's story, It was neat. It's kind of just whatever. It has some cool moments here and there, but yeah, I guess ultimately Boba Fett's arc in this show is that he's trying to get a new understanding of family, with the Tuscans and all that. Like, he gets his revenge and everything. He gets his revenge against... Well, not even he gets revenge against the Pikes. It's Fennec Shand who kills the Pike leader, which I found really dumb. It should have been Boba Fett killing the Pike leader, or at the very least arresting him or something. But at the end of the day, the new family has Black Chrysanthemum, the Street Rats, the Mods, as they're called, that's right. And then Fennec Shand, like, you don't care about them really all that much. So if this show's mission is to give Boba Fett a new family, I don't think they quite reached that point. So it had great moments throughout, most of which from the Mandalorian episodes. But aside from that, everything was kind of mid. It wasn't as great as it could have been. The highlight was Cad Bane. At the same time, could have been a lot better, and he should have lived past that 2-episode run that he had. So let's see where we put him. So the mission was clear. I don't think it was achieved as well as Obi-Wan, so we're gonna put him below that. Yeah, so I don't think it succeeded, I'll put it that way. There was a mission, but it failed. Solo definitely succeeded. Force Awakens, I wouldn't say... It had a mission, it succeeded, but the mission itself wasn't that great. I'd say the mission for Boba Fett was alright, and the end game was just alright. So for that, I think I'll put it below Force Awakens. I actually enjoy both of them pretty thoroughly, but yeah, ultimately, Boba Fett, it didn't feel very consequential at all, whereas Force Awakens, it still had something of a promise of a future to come. Boba Fett, it felt very open and shut. I mean, maybe that's why it was called a book. Maybe, just perhaps. Alright, moving on to Andor, and now for anyone who said that the show was boring and too slow and didn't have enough action, you obviously didn't watch past the first few episodes. This is the most brilliant show we've ever seen in Star Wars. It is extremely intelligent, brilliantly written, has some phenomenal character work. Oh boy, I really hope... Yeah, I think they are planning a season 2, aren't they? It's a show I didn't expect to like as much as I did. It's... Well, first of all, it's directed by the same guy who did Rogue One, which makes sense. We got Andor for the first time in Rogue One, and now we get a show that's about him. I'm even reluctant to even call this show Andor, because it's about so much more than that. I call it a civilian story. It's about people in the Empire, people on the streets, people in the rebellion, which isn't even a rebellion yet, people in politics. It's just all these... It's kind of an anthology. Like, it's all these different little stories for all these characters we met or haven't met throughout Star Wars history. And all these stories are either directly or indirectly having an effect on each other. Like, so for Cassian Andor, he's kind of just, he's kind of a street rat at this point. And then, like many of the other protagonists, he's kind of getting dragged into the rebellion, just doing odd jobs, and then he's kind of realizing what Jyn Erso would realize later on, that there is a greater purpose to what he's doing. And then he gets onto that prison where he meets... Kino Loy. Alright, I need a sidebar here. Kino Loy. Talk about a redemption for an actor. Again, Andy Serkis is golden. I love everything he's in, even if I don't like the movies that he's actually in. He was, of course, supreme, quote-unquote, supreme leader Snoke in Force Awakens and Last Jedi. Both performances he did a very good job in. His voice is very good. His performance is very magnetic. He did an excellent job. As for the character, they kind of wasted him. No, they didn't kind of wasted him. They just nerfed him completely. But when they brought Andy Serkis back, this time with no motion capture, it's just Andy Serkis, and then he acts, and then he's kind of just this man who's kind of conformed to a mold, isn't really allowing himself to even consider the possibility of escape. He just accepts the prison. His whole arc was so good. And then you have Cassian who's trying to say, there's more out there, you could still live a life. This is oppression you're dealing with. You need to get out of here. And then Kino's last words, when they're all kind of jumping out of the prison and into the water, his last words, I can't swim. Those are some of the most impactful words that I've heard. And that's just coming from not a rebel, not an Imperial, not a Jedi, not a Sith, not even a soldier, just a guy. And he says, I can't swim. I don't know. There's something about those lines that really hit me. Again, it's a civilian story. This is a little guy. This is just a person who's trying, like, obviously, yeah, literally, he can't go in the water, he'll drown, right? But it means more than that. Like, he doesn't know how to truly escape his prison. Like, he could convert Kino Loy's whole plight into, like, a philosophical parable, almost. He can't swim in the water, but he can't swim in the world anyways. Like, even though he knows he can't escape, he wouldn't know what to do anyways. It's not just out of a technicality that he can't swim, it's also out of fear. He doesn't know what to do. He's scared of the world. He doesn't know what's going on out there because he's been so committed to just being the best lapdog prisoner he could possibly be. And a very good one at that. He serves as a mentor role for all the other prisoners that he has in his wing. So, man, there's so many great arcs within this show. I can't even touch base on all of them because I got some favorites. I've got some I don't care about as much. I also really love, what's her name? You have that couple between the two women. I forget what they're called. I'm still learning the names, but I really liked the blonde's arc, kind of, where she's a rebel, but she's also apparently a relative of Mon Mothma, which is really cool. And, you know, she's trying her best. It's really, really subtle, but she's trying her best to be the best rebel that she can be. But at the same time, you notice that she has this romantic connection with this other rebel that's part of her squadron, and I'm really wanting to see that blossom. Like, that, I'm going back to Disney politics, right? We had, let's talk about all three again. Very brash, very blunt, very irritating, really trying to force, like, equal rights, politics, and all that crap. But for these two characters, Velsartha, that was her name, that's right. I unfortunately don't remember the other woman's name, but this was a case of introducing difference and an important real-world issue without shining a big overcompensating spotlight on it. You don't need to be loud and irritating to prove a point. People can simply be different because they are, and not simply just to make a point or to appease the masses. They simply are a couple, and that's it. And that couple is in danger because of the profession they've taken up. Well, not really profession, but just this war that they're both willingly involving themselves in, and you're worried about their connection. Not because they are lesbian necessarily, but because they love each other, and you want to see them hopefully remain a couple, and after this war has hopefully blown over, and we don't know how it's going to go for them. So, again, this is a good case of putting in inclusion and difference and variety with your characters without hitting the audience on the head with a bat, you know? Like, I love these two characters, and I really want to see more of them. I guess my only complaint about this show is there's so many storylines is that I kind of lose track, so those are really the only story arcs I can speak of at this very moment in time, but all of them are well handled. Then you have the Imperial woman. Again, I'm still trying to recall the names, so there's so many names. Deidre, that's right. And then she, I love her story with that intern guy who's kind of simping for her, really wanting to be a part of what she's doing. And she's kind of like, get away from me, you brat, what the hell? You're just an underling. I'll report you if you get any closer. And then I think the very last moment we have with them is that he pulls her away from a riot. And you can see in her eyes, this is a good guy. Maybe I want him around, you know? So there's just so many great tangents just about these people. No Force users, just people doing their job or just trying to survive. This is the Street Rat Chronicles, pretty much. And everybody is so well written. Every monologue, every one line, is very bleak in humor, but in exchange for that, it just all character development and little tiny micro moments that make us care about these characters. So what this show is trying to do, of course they use Andor as the template, but they're trying to show us that while all these Jedi and Sith are running around, while the rebellion's happening against the Empire and all that, while you have these two bookends being the prequels and the sequels, who are the people that are in this galaxy that are caught in all this conflict? These are the folks that are in the crossfire, and how are they handling it? You know, like, Andor's mother passes away, not even his real mother, like a surrogate mother, pretty much, adoptive mother, really. Then, of course, you have Elsartha and her girlfriend, I think, and they're trying to maintain the relationship. I really want to see that highlighted more, but again, it's gradual. It's not hitting you over the head with it. And I really love that they're doing that the way that they are. It's very earnest and humble and sweet and tender. I really like it a lot. And then, of course, you have Deidre and the intern. I can't remember his name, so I'm just going to call him the intern. But yeah, just so many different characters, so well done, and you want to know more about them. So, oh boy. Yeah, and even though the show's not over, you want to see it keep going, but there has not been a dull moment. Again, if you prefer more action, this isn't the show for you. It's an acquired taste, I get that. But the show knows what it is, and it does a very good job at being what it is. So I am going to take Andor. I'm stuck between A and S, honestly, because damn, because Rogue One also does a very good job. And Return of the Jedi also does very good. And that's right, we knocked it down because I felt like Leia could have had a little bit more. I feel like everybody in Andor gets their dues, which is really good. And New Hope, it's up there simply because it's just trying to be creative and introduce you to something. It's not trying to progress anything. So it's kind of floating there. So it's kind of an odd case. Andor, yeah, you know what? I need to give it to S tier. I know it sounds over generous, but again, we're focusing on how well a movie or show does at what it's trying to do. And I can't knock Andor at all. The dialogue's really good, the characters are fantastic, and most importantly, you want to know more. So, yeah, Empire stays exactly where it is because it is so pivotal, and none of this could have happened without that. So it's between Rogue One and Andor. I guess I'll put Andor below Rogue One because Rogue One was open and shut. We know everything about that there is. Andor, I hate to say it, it could still fail. You never know. It could still slump. So simply because it's still ongoing and we don't know what its legacy is at this point in time, I'll put it below. But right now, as it stands, compared to everything else below it, it does such a damn good job.